There are moments in history when the world holds its breath. Moments when the news stops feeling like simple headlines and begins to sound like ancient echoes rising from pages written thousands of years ago. Every time tensions increase between Israel and Iran, millions of people ask the same question: are we witnessing the fulfillment of a biblical prophecy? To answer seriously, we cannot begin with modern events. We must go back centuries. We must open the scriptures and first understand the complete prophetic framework. Because the Bible was not written as an advanced newspaper, but as a progressive revelation of God's purpose throughout history. The name Iran does not literally appear in the Bible, but Persia does. Persia was one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world, and geographically it corresponds to the territory we know today as Iran. In the book of Daniel, the Medo-Persian Empire appears as one of the powers prophesied to dominate the world stage. Daniel describes a succession of kingdoms that would rise and fall, showing that human history is not chaotic, but follows a line under divine sovereignty. Interestingly, Persia was not always an enemy of Israel. Under King Cyrus, Persia allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem after the exile in Babylon. That demonstrates that in the biblical narrative, nations are neither permanently allied nor permanently hostile. Their role can change according to the moment within the divine plan. However, when we move forward to chapters 38 and 39 of the book of Ezekiel, we find a different vision. There, a great coalition of peoples is described that in the latter days will rise against Israel. Among those peoples, Persia is explicitly mentioned. The text speaks of a massive invasion of numerous armies, of a threat that seems impossible to stop. It speaks of a land that has been restored and is living in confidence, and of enemies who surround it with intentions of conquest. The leader of that coalition is identified as Gog from the land of Magog. Throughout the centuries, multiple interpretations have emerged regarding the exact identity of these names. Some argue that they describe regions to the north of Israel. Others see in them symbols of broader hostile forces. What is clear is that Persia forms part of that alliance described by the prophet. Many contemporary interpreters observe the declared hostility of the Iranian government toward Israel and immediately connect it with this prophecy. They see in current tensions a possible preliminary scenario to the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. However, it is essential to maintain balance. The Bible does not provide specific dates, nor does it describe modern headlines. It presents principles, patterns, and ultimate outcomes, but not a detailed calendar of contemporary political events. Jesus himself warned in the Gospel of Matthew that we would hear of wars and rumors of wars, but he added something crucial. But the end is not yet. Wars by themselves are not the definitive sign. They are part of the historical process in a fallen world. Therefore, every conflict must be analyzed with discernment and not with panic. Biblical prophecy is not limited to describing military confrontations. It presents a deeper spiritual dimension. In Revelation, it is revealed that behind human structures there are spiritual influences. The struggle is not only between governments, but between purposes. Israel occupies a unique place in that narrative because it was the setting of the covenant with Abraham, the nation through which came the revelation of the law, the prophets, and finally, the Messiah. Throughout history, Israel has been constantly attacked, scattered, persecuted, and yet preserved. The return of the Jewish people to their land in the 20th century was interpreted by many believers as an event of enormous prophetic significance. If Israel once again stands at the geographical and political center of the world stage, then the prophecies involving that land take on renewed relevance. Iran, as the geographical heir of Persia, has adopted in modern times an ideologically confrontational stance toward Israel. Its political statements and regional influence have intensified the perception that it could form part of a future coalition like the one described by Ezekiel. But we must remember that prophecies often combine symbolic language with real geographical references. They are not always fulfilled immediately, nor in a single stage. In Ezekiel 38, after the invasion, God intervenes in a supernatural way. The text emphasizes that the purpose of that intervention is that the nations may recognize his sovereignty. The final focus is not the destruction of Israel, but the manifestation of divine power. This is key. The prophetic narrative does not end with the victory of the enemies, but with the affirmation that history belongs to God. Therefore, when we observe the current tensions between Israel and Iran, we must do so with two lenses: the historical and the spiritual. Historically, we see strategic rivalries, regional alliances, geopolitical interests. Spiritually, we see that Israel continues to be a central point in the biblical narrative, and that any threat against its existence immediately awakens prophetic questions. However, Scripture does not authorize us to declare with absolute certainty that every specific confrontation is the final fulfillment. Rather, it calls us to be watchful, sober, and firm in faith. Spiritual vigilance is not alarmism. It is inner preparation. Biblical prophecy was given to strengthen confidence in divine sovereignty, not to fuel fear. When Ezekiel describes the future invasion, the implicit message is that even when nations unite against Israel, the final outcome will not be in human hands. God will intervene. History is not out of control. Moreover, the Bible teaches that empires rise and fall according to a greater purpose. Daniel saw how Babylon was replaced by Persia, Persia by Greece, Greece by Rome. Each kingdom seemed definitive in its moment. Each one appeared invincible, and yet all of them passed away. That perspective reminds us that no current power, no matter how strong it may seem, is eternal. The conflict between Israel and Iran could intensify. It could transform into something greater. It could even form part of a scenario that prepares the future fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. But it could also be one more stage within a long history of regional tensions. Biblical prudence consists in recognizing the prophetic possibility without affirming more than the text reveals. What we do know with certainty is that the Bible announces a time when the nations will gather in opposition to God's purpose, and that time will culminate with the definitive intervention of the Lord. Until then, we will see conflicts, shifting alliances, and persistent tensions. The most important question is not whether this is exactly the final moment. The question is whether we are spiritually prepared for any moment. Jesus taught that preparation consists of faithfulness, vigilance, and hope, not constant speculation. When we look at the conflict between Israel and Iran in that light, we understand that beyond politics there is a greater narrative, a narrative in which Israel remains central, in which Persia has a place mentioned for millennia, and in which the final outcome does not depend on human treaties or military arsenals. If one day Ezekiel's prophecy is fulfilled in a literal way through a great coalition against Israel, it will not be because political analysts predicted it with precision, but because God's sovereign plan was always advancing toward that point. And if this conflict is not the one that fulfills it, the truth still remains. History moves toward an outcome determined by the divine will. Therefore, instead of fear, prophecy produces confidence. Instead of anxiety, it produces vigilance. Instead of despair, it produces hope. Because beyond Iran, beyond Israel, beyond any war, Scripture declares that the Lord reigns over the nations. And when the news seems to shake the world, remembering that truth is more important than any rushed interpretation,